The debrief log for Operation Vreth 7, initiated by Adjutant Keth Maru of the Vreth Dominion Intelligence Division, read as follows in its first entry, time-stamped 17:23 hours on the day in question. Operation Vreth 7 proceeded to initial extraction phase without incident. Target secured at 1400 hours. Identity verification at 1600 hours confirmed target is not Dr. Amara Okafor Lindqvist. Commander Vel-Ashur was notified at 1618 hours. Commander Vel-Ashur conducted personal assessment of detained individual at 1640 hours. Current time, 1723 hours. Assessment is ongoing. I am logging this. A gap of approximately 4 seconds between that sentence and the next, which read, "The assessment has been ongoing for 43 minutes. I am continuing to log this." Keth Maru had not added anything further. He did not need to. The 43 minutes said everything the log was going to allow itself to say. Vel-Ashur had been in operations for 17 years. He had run 11 successful extractions, 14 surveillance operations, 2 asset recoveries, and 1 incident he still did not fully discuss that had resulted in a commendation and a scar along his left forearm that turned a faint ochre in cold environments. In 17 years, he had never been in a room that felt like it belonged to someone else while he was the one sitting in it with all the authority. He was sitting in it now. The holding room at Way Station Vreth 7 was designed to be neutral. No windows, even temperature, functional furniture without comfort or discomfort as a deliberate choice. The design principle was that neutral conditions created neutral psychological states, which kept detainees manageable. The woman across the table from him was managing the neutral conditions by having reorganized them into something she apparently found acceptable, which included a cup of something that qualified as tea in the way that a mineral flat qualifies as a beach, and a piece of paper she had produced from her bag, and an expression of complete and genuine attention directed at him in a way that made him feel, with the specific discomfort of a professional facing a new variable, that he was the one being assessed. He was the one being assessed. He had noticed this within the first 4 minutes and had filed it under anomalous, continued observation required, without changing anything about his approach, which was composed, professional, systematic. Her name was Janet Okafor. She was 61 years old. She was the mother of the individual his operation had been designed to collect, not the individual herself. And the fact that she had been in the wrong corridor at the wrong time was an administrative irregularity that he had explained in those terms, and she had received with a nod that suggested she had already understood it and was not especially troubled by it, which was its own category of anomalous. He had explained the situation. He had used the phrase administrative irregularity, which was his professional vocabulary for a mistake he was not going to call a mistake. He had explained that her status was technically that of an unintentional detainee, and that the situation would be clarified in short order. She had said, "I understand. Before we get to the clarification, can I ask you something about the actual goal here? Because I've been working through it, and I think there might be a structural issue with the approach." Vel-Ashur had said, "I am not going to discuss the operation's objectives with you." She had said, "You don't have to. I'm working from what I could piece together. The Kareth corridor, yes? My daughter's been dealing with that for 3 years." And then, without waiting for him to either confirm or deny, "The Assembly's not going to sign under this kind of pressure. It's not that they won't, it's that they structurally can't. You're creating liability for the signing authority. Do you have anyone on your team who has worked with institutional legal frameworks?" He had not answered. He had spent the silence looking for the correct professional response, and the correct professional response had not appeared, and the silence had extended past the point where silence was a tactical tool and into the territory where it was simply him not answering, while a 61-year-old human woman waited with the patience of someone who had waited out a great many silences and understood that they resolved eventually. That had been 20 minutes ago. In the 20 minutes since, the situation had shifted. He was still reconstructing how. The paper she had produced from her bag was now on the table between them. He had looked at it 4 times. The 4th time he had done it without intending to, which was when he understood that something was genuinely wrong with his management of this encounter. The paper contained, in neat handwriting that was slightly cramped on the left margin as though she had been writing quickly, a restructured version of the Dominion's negotiating position that removed the elements the Assembly's legal framework made impossible and replaced them with concessions the Assembly had authority to grant without board approval. And it preserved, he had reviewed this specific element 3 times because it seemed wrong, and it was not wrong. It preserved the Dominion's actual objective. The access. Not the Karath corridor specifically. The access. He had not told her that. She had arrived at it from incomplete information and 2 cups of bad tea in 20 minutes. He said, "How did you know what our core objective was?" She said, "I didn't, exactly, but if you've been pushing on the corridor for 11 years and you're willing to do something this disruptive, the corridor isn't the objective. It's the access. The corridor is just the current vehicle." She tapped the paper with 1 finger. If access is actually what you need, there are 2 other routes that would serve the same function and that the Assembly can grant through the standard concession framework. It would take about 4 months, which is longer than this, but this isn't going to work, so the comparison isn't really 3 weeks versus 4 months. It's 4 months versus however long you spend on an approach with a structural problem. Vel-Ashur looked at the paper. A fine ochre warmth was beginning at the base of his jaw, the involuntary thermal flush that Vreth biology produced under high emotional arousal, usually suppressed in professional contexts by specific trained techniques he was currently not deploying because his attention was entirely occupied by the paper and the woman who had written it. The paper was correct. He could see the correctness of it the way he could see a well-built tactical plan, in the architecture, in the internal logic, in the way each element connected to the next without redundancy. 11 years of his superiors telling him the corridor was non-negotiable, and here was someone who had been in this room for 2 hours asking a question 11 years of internal briefings had not thought to ask: whether the corridor was what they needed, or whether the corridor was simply what they had fixed on. He said carefully, "This would require a conversation with my superiors." She said, "Of course. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm just suggesting that before anyone commits to a timeline, it's worth knowing whether the approach is going to work." She collected the paper and set it neatly in front of him. "Take it with you. I've made another copy." She produced the copy from her bag. She had prepared a 2nd copy. He became aware, in the specific way one becomes aware of something the body has been doing without consultation, that his arms had come entirely out of their professional tight fold. They were extended at his sides in the posture his training categorized as fully engaged, or, in less controlled contexts, overwhelmed. He had no clear memory of them moving. From the observation window that looked into this room, he was aware there was an observation window and that Keth Miru was behind it, and that Keth Miru's log was going to be thorough. Keth Miru would be logging this. He stood. He said he needed a moment. Janet said, "Of course, take your time," in the tone of someone chairing a meeting and granting a comfort break, and Vel-Ashur walked out of the holding room with his arms deliberately refolded and the paper in his hand. The corridor outside the holding room had the quality of a space that had recently been organized. This was because it had been. The other 3 individuals Janet had encountered in the initial holding facility, a trade attaché, a journalist, and a freight broker who had been genuinely, specifically, entirely in the wrong place, were now operating as a coherent unit with assigned functions. The trade attaché was seated against the wall with paper, writing notes in a systematic fashion. The journalist was cross-legged on the floor with a small recording device she had produced from somewhere on her person, writing with the focused expression of someone on deadline. The freight broker had located the facility's food and water storage and was managing it with an organizational rigor that suggested he had received clear instructions and taken them very seriously. Vel-Ashur stopped. He looked at them. He said, "Who authorized this arrangement?" All three said Janet. He asked what Janet had told them. The freight broker, without looking up from the inventory he was apparently constructing, said, "She said we'd probably be here a while and we might as well be useful." The journalist looked up from her writing. She asked if he could provide a comment from someone in authority about the expected timeline. He said no. She wrote something down. The writing down was the part that concerned him most. He had no way of knowing what she was writing, which meant he had no way of assessing it, which meant it existed in his operational picture as an uncontrolled variable, and he had spent 17 years removing uncontrolled variables from operational pictures. He went to find Kethmiru. Kethmiru was in the monitoring station adjacent to the observation window, maintaining his log with the dedication of a professional who has identified this particular record as one that will be read at significant altitude above his current position in the chain of command. He looked up when Vel-Ashur entered. His expression was the expression of someone who has just watched 47 minutes of footage that he has logged with complete accuracy and intends to continue logging with complete accuracy, and has absolutely nothing to say about any of it. Vel-Ashur said, "Situation assessment." Kethmiru said carefully, "From an operational standpoint, the situation remains technically controlled, Commander." Vel-Ashur said, "Does it?" Kethmiru did not answer. The absence of an answer was logged. Vel-Ashur stood in the monitoring station for a moment with the paper in his hand, the paper Janet had produced from her bag along with its twin, and made a decision. The debrief log's second entry, time-stamped 48 minutes after the assessment began, read, "Commander Vel-Ashur has been presented with a document produced by the detainee. The document appears to be a restructured version of the Dominion's negotiating position. Commander Vel-Ashur is reading the document. He has read it 3 times. He is reading it a 4th time." A pause in the entry. Then, "The detainee has poured him a cup of the tea. He accepted it. I am logging this. I am logging everything. I want the record to reflect that I am logging everything." Vel-Ashur went back into the holding room. He had made a decision. The decision was this. He was going to contact his superiors. He was going to present the restructured framework. He was going to do this not because he had been talked into it by a detainee. He was an operations commander. He had a protocol. He operated within it. But because the framework was, evaluated on its own merits as a piece of strategic analysis, worth presenting upward. The fact that it had originated with someone who was currently in a holding room on his way station was an operational anomaly he would address with full transparency in the debrief. He told her this. She said, "Good." And then, with a pause that was exactly as long as the pause needed to be and not 1 second longer, "While you do that, can I get your secondary communications frequency? Because I think I should also reach out to the assembly. Not officially. I know some people. I'd just like to make sure they're not doing something reactive on their end that closes off the options." Vel-Ashur looked at her. A faint pressure built in his secondary hearing organs, the equivalent of a very quiet alarm, the sensation he associated with tactical situations developing faster than his model of them. She said, "I'm not going to tell them where I am. I know you have concerns about that." This sentence was delivered with a tone that acknowledged his concerns as reasonable, without implying in any way that she was bound by them. He had, in 17 years of professional operation, never encountered this specific tone. He did not have a category for it. "I just think if we're going to present this framework, it helps if both sides are in a position to receive it. Otherwise, you get a good proposal meeting a bad mood, and good proposals don't survive bad moods." He said, You want me to give you a communication channel so that you can contact the people we are holding you against. She said, "Yes, I know how it sounds, but I'm asking because I think it will actually help your outcome. And I think you can see that, which is why you're still sitting there instead of ending this conversation." A pause, brief and genuine. Am I wrong about that? He was still sitting there because she was right. He knew she was right. The framework was sound. The call was a logical extension of the framework. The logic proceeded from correct premises to a correct conclusion, and the correct conclusion was that he should give her the frequency. He also knew, with the specific clarity of a professional examining something uncomfortable in himself, that he had walked back into this room when he could have ended the assessment, transferred the situation to a subordinate, and processed it through standard channels. He had not done that. He had come back. And the reason he had come back was not purely tactical, and he was choosing not to examine the reason too closely because he was in the middle of an active operation, and examinations of that kind were for debriefs, not corridors. He gave her the communications frequency. Janet's call with the assembly contact lasted 11 minutes. Vel-Ashur listened from the monitoring station, and the content of the call was, by any measure, mild. An old acquaintance touching base, mentioning in an offhand way that she had been looking at some trade documentation and had noticed a thing about the Karath corridor, wondered if anyone had considered the alternative access routes because they seemed to accomplish the same objective more cleanly, worth someone looking at before anything got decided. She did not reveal her location. She did not reveal her situation. Her voice was warm and unhurried and carried the tone of someone sharing a professional observation over coffee, which was a thing she had apparently decided the tone would be and had executed without any apparent difficulty. The call ended. Vel-Ashur sat with the quality of what had just happened for a moment before he transmitted the framework to his superiors. His superiors responded 40 minutes later. They wanted to know where the restructured framework had originated. He told them he had utilized subject matter expertise encountered during the operation. His superiors said the framework had merit, and they wanted to pursue the alternative route analysis. They asked no further questions about the subject matter expertise because Vel-Ashur's tone was the tone of a commander who was managing an active operation and would brief everything completely at the formal debrief. And his superiors recognized this tone and respected it. The tone was doing, in addition to this, a great deal of other work that Vel-Ashur chose not to itemize. The release of Janet Okafor and the 3 other unintentional detainees was handled with the precise professionalism that Vel-Ashur's division considered its standard. Transport arranged, documentation complete, a formal apology on behalf of the Dominion for the administrative irregularity of the initial detention. Janet accepted the apology with a nod. She said, "I understand. These things happen." She said it with no irony, none at all. These things happened. She had worked long enough in situations that needed fixing to have developed somewhere along the way a genuine tolerance for the situations that needed fixing. The other 3 were processed ahead of her. The freight broker shook 3 hands on his way out and thanked someone for the water supply, which he had maintained at adequate levels throughout. The journalist left without looking up from the device she was writing on, which had not left her hand in approximately 4 hours. The trade attaché said something formal and correct and departed. Then Janet. At the corridor exit, she paused. She turned back to Vel-Ashur, who was standing at the correct professional distance with his arms in the formal tight fold, because he had refolded them somewhere around the 90-minute mark and had kept them that way with the specific attention of someone maintaining a thing that is not maintaining itself naturally. She said, "If the framework works, and I think it will, the bones are good. You should know it came from your side as much as mine. Your original position had the right objective. It just had the wrong vehicle." She looked at him with the quality he had noticed when he first walked into the room, what felt like approximately 17 years ago and had been approximately 2 hours. She was paying complete attention. not performing it, paying it. You have good instincts. You just needed someone to tell you the corridor wasn't the point. He said, I did not tell you that. She said, no, I could see it though. She picked up her bag, which contained everything she needed and several things other people might need, and 2 cups of something that qualified as tea only in a technical sense. And she said it was nice to meet him, and she hoped the access agreement worked out. She said this with the warm, easy finality of someone wrapping up a successful mediation, which was what she believed she had just done. And she was correct in this belief. And she left. Vel-Ashur stood in the corridor. He became aware, by the specific slow process of awareness that arrives after the fact, that his arms were fully extended at his sides. He folded them. He turned to Kethmiro, who had materialized at his shoulder with the silent efficiency of someone who has been doing this job for 6 years and knows when to be proximate. Vel-Ashur said, I want the full debrief documentation complete by 800. Kethmiro said, yes, Commander. Then, Commander. Vel-Ashur said, yes. Kethmiro said, what do I list as her role in the operation? Vel-Ashur considered this question for a duration that was longer than the question appeared to require. He considered the options. He considered the paper, still in his interior pocket, and the 43 minutes that had become 111 minutes, and the framework that was currently moving up the chain of command under his name and his endorsement, and the frequency he had given her, and the call that had been mild and unhurried and had done more for the Dominion's 11-year objective than 11 years of legitimate channels. He said, list her as a consultant. He walked away. He did not walk slowly. He was a professional. He walked at a normal pace down the corridor toward the operations center, and he did not look back. And he did not think too closely about what he was feeling, because what he was feeling was not a debrief item, and it was not a tactical consideration, and it was not anything he had a clean professional category for. His adjutant had worked with him for 6 years. His adjutant would know. He was content to let his adjutant know without having to say it. Kethmiro stood in the corridor alone. The sound of Vel-Ashur's retreating footsteps faded. The corridor was quiet. Kethmiro opened the log. He wrote, Detainee Janet Okafor released 1831 hours, classified per commander's instruction as consultant. I have noted this. I have nothing further to add at this time. I want the record to reflect, a great deal to add. I am choosing not to add it. He closed the log. He went to file the paperwork. The final entry in the debrief log for Operation Vreth 7 was time-stamped 3 weeks later, and it read, the preliminary access framework, based on the alternative route analysis developed during Operation Vreth 7, has entered formal negotiation with the Assembly's Trade Relations Office. Projected completion, 14 weeks. The Dominion's legal team has assessed the framework as structurally sound. Commander Vel-Ashur has been commended by the Operations Division for what the commendation describes as creative tactical problem-solving during a complex operation. The commander accepted this commendation without comment. A pause in the entry, longer than the ones before it. Then, I spoke with the commander briefly after the commendation ceremony. He said, Kethmiro, have we ever had anyone in HR? I said we had a personnel division. He said, not what I mean. He did not explain what he meant. He did not need to. I have noted this. A final pause. The log's last line. I consider this entry complete. I am going to think about what he meant for some time.